they've been pretty helpful about getting stuff together for me. So, alrighty, I think we're going to get started. If you don't mind, be respectful of everyone's time. We'll leave the door open for like 5 more minutes, because this is all just my introduction. So I know a lot of you already, but for those of you who don't know, my name is James Davis. I'm one of the co-founders of Camp Stomping Ground. We just finished our 2nd year of operation. We run a summer camp program in near Binghamton, New York. And basically it's a summer camp that's grounded in the philosophies of unschooling and pretty much letting kids do what they want with whom they want for as long as they want and seeing how it goes. I guess a little bit of background might be useful. So I actually I met my wife at summer camp, but not an unschooling summer camp of any kind. Just like most people, when we got done working at camp, we decided to grow up and get real jobs and move out into the world and whatever. And we both planned to be public school teachers. Now my wife wound up teaching in a private school, and I wound up just doing other stuff and never actually got into teaching full time. But while she was pregnant with our first son, she came back from a continuing education program, and she had seen a video from Ken Robinson on, I can't remember how schools kill creativity or something. It's like the RSA animate video. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but quite influential. And she showed it to us, and this was really a big turning point in our lives in terms of how we view kids and how we want to work with kids. Because for us, having been schooled to be teachers, it was such a point of curiosity for us that we never really even encountered this perspective before. This idea that schools might be hindrance on the creativity of children, or that might have any negative impact on them at all, right? When you're coming up in the teaching paradigm, a lot of the way the conversation is pitted is as though parents and kids are sort of allies on your team, but be wary of them, and you're going to have to you're going to know more than they do, and you're going to have to persuade them to come to your way of thinking and all that sort of thing. And so this idea that we would partner with kids and that we would bring them on our side was totally foreign to us. And we felt, I think, a little bit of a sense of betrayal in that moment because, again, we had paid quite a lot of money for our educations, and we just wondered why, if these ideas were bad, why not just bring them up and make arguments against them? If this was wrong or somehow, coming from a place that's, not helpful, why not just bring it up and say, well, some fringy people think this, but here's why it's wrong. And so the fact that it was ignored completely, I think, sparked our interest even more. And so, and obviously this is quite timely because we were pregnant at the time, and our plan was to send our kids to public school the same way we were, because we turned out okay, right? And so we figured they would too. And appreciate a lot of the things about public school that we liked, growing up in really diverse areas and meeting all sorts of different people. And we were of the mindset that the only way you could do that was through public school. So ultimately, about a month after we first watched that video, we changed our minds completely. My wife wanted to quit her job, and we wanted to start our own school. Except starting a school is really hard, and there's a lot of red tape. And beyond that, even if you do get a school started, well, you have to sell people on your vision. And we were very new to all of these ideas, and even as we were trying to sell the idea to our close family and friends, it was mostly met with either indifference or hostility. So we decided, maybe a school isn't going to work. But hey, we met at camp. I fancy myself a decent camp director. That's something I've been able to do in the past. And so basically what we did was call around to a bunch of camps and who are hiring and make our pitch, which was we want to come and let kids do whatever they want. And most camps hung up very quickly when we made this pitch. But there was one camp, a small camp in upstate New York called the Vanderkamp Center, where they were going out of business. They were about $30,000 in debt, and they said they had one summer left of runway. We could come in, we could give it a shot for one summer, do whatever we want, and they liked our references, so they figured, what the heck, we're going to go out of business anyway. Why not just try something brand new? So we went up there, and it was interesting because when they interviewed me, what they pictured was, have you ever talked to any of your friends who aren't in an unschooling? Why don't you shut that door? If you've ever talked to your friends who aren't of an unschooling mentality, I think a lot of them can latch on to some of the things the parts that they like, right? Without, considering the ramifications of how it totally looks. So they're like, yeah, letting kids play, that sounds great, come up to camp. But as we got there and we started breaking down the nitty-gritty, we already started getting pushback. And it was this big moment for us because in a lot of ways, I'm not opposed to incrementalism, right? Making steps towards the world you want to see. But for us, I think this is where actually camps fail in so many ways because in a lot of ways, camps are already better than school, right? They're, school with better classes designed to actually for kids to have fun. And they do their best. I know I've now done a lot of camp consulting and spoken at camp conferences, and I know these are good people who really want to change kids' lives and give them fun places, but they come from this perspective where being a little bit better than school is like all they aspire to, right? It's like, well, we'll be like school, but we'll have rock climbing walls and archery, and that's fine. I really appreciate that they're coming from a place of, actually wanting the kids to have fun and not just kind of not caring if they have fun or not, which is, was a lot of the conversation when I was becoming a school teacher. But for us, that didn't feel like the point. If we were going to come there, we wanted to try something sort of whole hog and really scratch an itch for us, because I think one of the big fears we had coming to these ideas was, well, how is this actually going to work? Are kids going to succeed? Are kids able to use this freedom wisely? If we get a bunch of kids together and allow them to interact on this totally voluntary basis where they don't have anyone telling them what to do for the most part, if they don't have anyone, telling them how to spend their time or with whom to spend their time, will they fail? And I think we thought it would succeed, but we weren't sure. And I don't know if, sometimes I still have struggle with this, and I still have some fear around it, but we just wanted to give it a shot. So we did, and we started to sell our message to kids and parents, and we got kids in, and it turns out it was a tremendous success. So we more than doubled the size of the camp. The camp succeeded. Bringing these ideas of unschooling, and by the way, we had almost no unschooling families at camp. These were all kids from traditional schooling backgrounds. Their parents really liked the ideas of them coming in and having a week just to kind of let loose, I guess. And, we were able to pitch them on the benefits they would see from that and all that sort of thing, which I'll share in a bit. But it was kind of interesting because, if you don't know much about summer camps are generally a dying industry, with all the competition for summer eyeballs and hearts and time. Camps, for the most part, are going away. There are fewer camps now than there were 10 years ago, and fewer camps 10 years ago than there were 20 years before that. And, I'm talking about sleepaway camps, so there are more day camp programs and that sort of thing. But sleepaway camp, by and large, is harder to run now than it's been at any point probably in the last 40 years. And so having results like these were very unusual. This opened up a lot of opportunity for us to go around and speak at summer camp conferences and share our story and share our ideas and share what worked. An interesting thing happened. So, like I said, I mentioned I had this big opportunity, and I went around. And have you ever been so on fire with a new idea that works, and then you meet someone with all this enthusiasm, and you say, this is what we're doing, and it's a little different, but it's really working for our family. And you know what usually happens? No one cares. And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds good, okay. And then they want to poke holes, right? And I think they want to poke holes from a well-meaning place, but it usually starts with something like, so do you have anyone from inner cities at your camp? And I'm like, what are you trying to say, first of all? Can people from inner cities not embrace freedom in the same way that upper class white kids can? I don't know. I try not to get offended. I'm like, well, yes, we have a big scholarship program. We bring kids in from all sorts of backgrounds, and they really seem to get it. And then they say, well, what about kids with special needs? And I say, it turns out kids with special needs, in many cases, they would love to just be given space to just be, because they get tons of input from other people telling them who and where and why and how to be all the time. People are so worried for kids with special needs that they won't be able to see someday that they're willing to basically put them through anything in the meantime to realize what I think from a well-meaning place, hope will meet that goal someday. But yeah, we were mostly met with a ton of skepticism. And so we heard so many common complaints, and I'm sure these are complaints you've heard too. But one of the reasons I wanted to come, and I talked to Ann about talking last year and then again this year, was just some of the incredible beauty we saw from bringing kids in while wrestling with these objections on our own. So one of the most common ones, and I know this is one a lot of unschooling families get too, especially ones who, have a more slower paced day-to-day lifestyle, is, well, why will anyone try anything new, right? So kids given freedom at camp, one of the things parents will complain about, I guess, or offer concern about when they call up is, so my kid's going to come to your camp, and they're allowed to bring their cell phone and their iPad, and you're going to let them do whatever they want. And I say, yeah, that's the pitch. And they say, well, I think they're just going to come and play video games the whole time. And I said, well, they might. It would be really unusual. We've never had a kid come and only play video games the whole time at camp, but we're not going to rule it out. And they said, well, why are they going to try anything new? Why am I going to pay you to have my kid come and do the same thing they do at home all the time? And I say, well, first of all, just coming to camp is a new thing. If your kid chooses to come to camp, and we don't accept kids whose parents are forcing them to come to camp. It's something we ask parents. And unfortunately, that drives a lot of customers away, because a lot of kids don't want to go to camp. But that's not what we do. We don't take your kids if they don't want to be there. But if your kid chooses to come to camp, well, they've already really stuck their neck out there. Going and sleeping away, especially if you're from a household that is very caring and nurturing and not a place you want to leave, is very challenging and really, really hard. So just by going and agreeing to be here for a week, they've already really done something that most kids aren't courageous enough to choose for themselves. And second of all, humans are really dynamic beings. Like, nobody wants to just do the same thing for all time. I think in the last few years, there's been a lot of, really nice research on boredom and the evolutionary benefits of being bored that's burbled to the surface, which is to say, we get bored for a reason. Like, being bored is not this thing that we need to erase from our mentality. So much of my childhood was spent learning how to deal with my boredom without being disruptive. As a grown-up, I spend very little time being bored because I just don't do boring things. I choose to do work that's fulfilling to me. I parent half-time. I only work half-time, so I spend time with my kids, and when I'm feeling that sense of boredom, I acknowledge that and I embrace it as a signal, well, maybe we're not doing the right thing right now. But if we're in a place where we're scolding people for being bored and we're helping them to dull that instinct of feeling boredom and acknowledging it and doing something about it, well, I think that's really not beneficial. So when kids come to camp, we let them be bored if they want to, and then every single kid we've ever had at camp has wound up trying something new. And the really interesting thing about trying new things when you're not forced to try new things is that it feels good. I don't know if you've ever been in the position where someone has forced you to try something new. Is this something, a shared experience we all have?
Ice cream.
Ice cream? So someone really twisted your arm to try ice cream? But it's kind of a funny thing, because you'll see this, and I know, by the way, it's so just good to be with family on this, because when I talk to most crowds, they're like, now, hold on, I love forcing kids to try new things. That's like how they get to try new things. When I talk at camps. But I know this is going to be foreign to you guys, but it's a super, super common adult-child interaction where adult has an idea of something a kid will feel fulfilled by, right? So they come to them and say, you should try climbing on the ropes at camp. And the kid says, hell no, I'm not going to climb on the ropes, right? They're like, climbing on the ropes sounds terrible. It's super high up. Everyone's going to look at my butt in the harness, and I don't want to do that. That sounds bad to me. And then the adult will say something like, well, why don't we just put the harness on? Why don't you just come to the ropes course and we'll put the harness on and we'll see how it feels then. And the kid, being used to being cajoled and pressured and pushed in different directions, will oftentimes submit and say, fine, I'll just go to the ropes course if you'll get off my back, right? So they go there, and then it's the same story with the harness, and it's the same story with the first step and getting buckled into the rope. And soon enough, the kid is 3 steps up the ladder. Now, some percentage of kids winds up liking it, right? They resisted at first, and then they go up the thing, and they have a good time, and they come down. But the discussion between the adult and the child in that instance is rarely a celebration. It's I told you so, And it never feels good to be told so, especially when it comes to something as personal as your own interests and the things you enjoy. And so what could have been a beautiful thing, this child discovering a new hobby someday, because eventually probably if they're the type of person who's going to love climbing on ropes, that opportunity is going to be around again, right? This is not some scarce thing like swimming with turtles in the Galapagos or something. There's ropes and places to climb and archery to shoot or whatever your thing is all over the place. But when you're forced to try something new, and even if you kind of like it, it's begrudging. There's no joy there. There's no celebration. There's no a meeting of the minds. That great feeling when you're like, you have to see this movie and someone watches it and you celebrate, or you have to try eating at this place, or you have to try sushi for the first time. These beautiful moments that human beings can share together. Instead, it's this toxic power over thing where it's like, see, I know it's better for you than you do, And that's not good. We never want someone to experience something and then for us to tell them so. And the other one, another huge objection we get all the time is the idea of kids walking all over us. So a lot of unschoolers, again, I don't need to preach this to y'all, but a lot of people worry, when you let kids, especially this number of kids, and especially this number of kids without the reps of being given freedom, what would they do? I mentioned kids from the inner city. There were 2 kids in particular from inner city Syracuse who came to camp, and I always know I'm going to love a kid when the social worker or the parent or whoever calls me up and warns me about the kid, because usually that's a kid with spunk and who hasn't been squashed yet. So these 2 kids, they're friends, cousins, And the social worker calls and says, well, these, it's going to be really hard. They were kicked out of the county camp last year, and we're just really, our goal for them is to make it halfway through the week. Obviously, call me. We'll pick them up right away, all this sort of thing. And so, I get a call like this, and I'm trying to be patient and listen and all this other stuff, and but kind of feeling sad and sick because I know that this is the expectation that everyone who meets these kids has, because, that's what they're told. And they're not given a chance to have this sort of clean slate. Another beautiful thing about camp that, unfortunately for these kids, they don't get a lot of times. But so they come to camp, and things are pretty much going fine. And on Monday, I'm walking by the table at lunchtime, and I hear one of the boys, and he's kind of going a little bit too far, teasing another kid he doesn't know, just the way he likes to interact. I don't think he's trying to pick on him, but it's pushing it a little bit too far. And I'm thinking, man, should I jump in here? I know and again, that warning pops up in my mind. And then I hear his friend turn to him and said, hey, oh man, this camp has 3 rules, and you don't want to break them. These people, they trust us. We don't want to ruin that. And then the other kid's he snaps out of it, and he's like, oh yeah, that was it. They didn't want to walk. They weren't trying to get away with anything. They weren't trying to come in and take advantage of us. In fact, when we pointed out to them that we did trust them, that we weren't going to worry and sneak around and start off really strict and then eventually become more lenient or whatever the folks will tell you about working with kids from the city. When we just told them we trusted them and explained why, and let them know that we thought that would be the self-fulfilling prophecy, well, they just let each other know, when they stepped out of line. And now it's not always perfect. Sometimes I know I get internally defensive and I want to paint this utopian picture that there's never any conflict. There's occasionally conflict, but it never comes from a place in our experience of kids wanting to take advantage of us. In fact, I think in most cases, the kids that come to camp, and particularly the schooled kids, are so appreciative of being trusted and being given that leash. And we explain why, we explain where we come from. We acknowledge that most people don't think that way. And when they come to camp and they experience that, their instinct is never to try and bully us or push us around. It's in fact to form relationships with us, which is, probably intuitive to y'all, but we see it work at scale. 120 kids coming in from all different backgrounds, special needs, inner city, whatever the boogeymen of child development that people have out there, they come together, and for the most part, they get along, and they love each other, and they love us too. And this is a slide I wanted to throw in, just because I think it's something I want us to all be super appreciative of. And when you get into child development, I know many of you are more versed in this than I am, but a point of huge curiosity for me when we first started getting into this, say in 2009, was how unusual it was to find anything that was coming from our perspective. So when I say we're the 1%, what I'm talking about is 99% of literature that you read about kids is all about how to sculpt them or help them become something that you want, right? So it's how to get them to sleep through the night if they're a baby, or how to get them to get better grades or get into the right college, or to, not hit their brother, or whatever the thing is. It's the image of the adult as the carpenter, right? The kid is the block of wood, and he comes out, and if there's not a wise carpenter, he's just going to sit there as a crappy block of wood for the rest of his life. And then there's the 1%, which I think is us. And maybe it's less than 1%. Probably is. And what we're seeking and what we're thirsty for is how to help kids grow into what they want to be, right? Gardeners or something, right? People who, or maybe a Sherpa. You meet a Sherpa, and a Sherpa says, oh, you want to get to the top of that mountain? Let's go. I can help you with that, right? And I think that's our role, and that's such a more beautiful and more positive relationship with a child. A kid is just a person with a dream. And in many cases, they're living their dream every day if we don't stand in the way. But they've got huge dreams and big goals and all of these things they want to be someday, because that's what people are born to do. And when we get them together and we try to tell them that they're less than just by virtue of being a child, just because they happen to have been born 30 years before we have, we really lose something. And they lose something too. They lose a sense of being able to sculpt themselves. Instead of, looking up at a mountain and plotting out the course and finding help when they need it, they're just looking around for their carpenter all the time. Well, what's next? What am I supposed to do next year? I need to get ready for high school. I heard high school is hard. Oh, and forget about college and getting an internship and a job and married and kids and retired someday. Where's my helper? Who's going to show me how to do this? And so this isn't there's no big takeaways from this slide. It's mostly just to say thanks for being here and for being at the thing. So I just wanted to say thanks. So what did we do? So when we started, I mentioned we worked at a different camp. Eventually, I think many people find when you tie in with people who aren't fully philosophically aligned on this stuff, you're always going to brush up against the limitations of what they're comfortable with. So I had a board of directors They liked what we were doing. They liked the results of camp. Obviously, they liked more money in the camp's coffers. They liked the feedback from parents. But as the camp became more successful, they started to want to pick more nits. They said, well, do we really need to do that much freedom? Do we really need to let kids stay up as late as they want at camp? That seems extreme. This one parent complained. Or do you really need to let transgender kids, use this bathroom or sleep in that lodge? And this is a real argument I got. I said, well, this one group of parents said they're not going to send their kids to camp next year. So camp doesn't sound like a very good fit for them. Because the kids come here and if they say, I'm a girl, we say, sounds good. I don't know what's inside your wherever, that makes you a girl. Like, you're a girl. Sounds good. So we ran into some problems there. Ultimately, we wanted to make a new camp and start fresh. And it was really interesting, I think, because our first instinct, and I think I run into this as an unschooling father as well, our first instinct is to think like, well, what if we were kids with $100,000? Like, what would we have done with our lives? And so we built this super extravagant, very entertaining, adults as the entertainers model, where kids were coming in and we're slaying dragons, and one of the things we love to let kids do is just dig everything up. Kids are always told, like, don't step on the flowers, or like, no, you can't dig. So we had 800 acres at camp. We just gave them an acre and garden tools and just let them tear it up. So that was a ton of fun. Wrestle things, and kids also like to both get covered in paint and get paint on things. Paint and art in general, I find, is a really interesting. There's this interesting tug of war going on in schools in particular, where it's like, be creative and don't get a mess on anything. So we had the arts and crafts building, really just get paint all over it. And kids are always surprised when you just walk by a building with a paintbrush and you're just like, paint on the side, and you just walk away. I like that guy. I'm going to figure out what he's up to. The other thing we just do is, and I think we still like a lot of this stuff, but there's more payoffs coming. But we'd love to just have loose parts. I know a lot of people are aware of sort of loose parts theory and the benefits of that. But for us, we saw incredible stuff when we just put loose parts out and just let kids go to town. So in this particular instance, it was very, very hot out, and we have a lake. These two girls were grossed out by the lake, so instead they wanted to build a pool. So they got hay bales and a tarp, and we had this parachute thing, and they spent about an afternoon building the pool, and then they advertised it to people, and they would have people come in, and they were the lifeguards and stuff, and it was pretty neat. We let them destroy stuff, especially stuff that's garbage anyway. It's going to go to scrap metal. There's no reason not to smash it up with a bat first. And of course, we do a lot of other modern tech-related things that I think, again, most camps are freaked out by. I don't totally get it, making movies and being in movies. But the really interesting thing that we found was, in our desire to entertain and be these things, be these heroes for kids coming in, I think some of that was maybe projecting a little bit, because what most kids want to do when they come to camp is just hang out with each other. So it's like an unschooling conference. Like, we have a little area we call the Grove, and there's hammocks in there, and kids hang out there all day. And now many kids go off and play games and sports and do whatever. But we started seeing a super majority, especially of teenagers, just go in there and just laugh and just be. And it's really interesting, because when you spend a whole year planning out elaborate worlds where knights fight dragons, and you've got all the props and all this other stuff, and then kids just want to hang out with each other, I wonder if sometimes I and other adults that work with kids start taking it personally. And I know as an unschooling dad, sometimes I'm like, oh, I read about this sweet craft online. I'm going to set it out on the table, and my kids' minds are going to be blown. And we're going to be, making the kiwi crate or whatever. And then they come down and they're like, oh yeah, sweet craft. Anyway, are we going to go see our friends now? And you can take it personally. And I remember this one summer in particular, we had really blown out the programming stuff, and I was sitting with my brother at the time, who's 7 years younger than me, but has always understood this better than I do. And I was saying, well, what are we doing? What is wrong with our games that the teenagers don't like them? Like, they don't seem to want to play them. They think they're kind of corny, like, what can we do that's going to engage them more? And he put forth a question that stuck with me, even, into my parenting days, because my kids were still quite young at the time. And he said, well, what if the best parts of camp happen between all the stuff we come up with, What if the best part of an unschooling conference isn't coming and listening to the mind-blowing talks? What if it's just hanging out with other people who get you, and being given space to spend as much time as you want just being? And what if what the kids do at camp doesn't matter at all, as long as they're both engaged and safe? And this was an interesting turning point for us, because, again, when you're coming from a place of child development, no one ever really talks about the wisdom or the art behind giving kids space. Like, it's not a conversation people have. It's not something people strategize on. It's mostly something they express concern about. And so from a camping perspective, again, this is something I get a lot of. I like talking to you guys because you mostly smile and nod when I say stuff like this. I'm used to getting mostly scowls and like half hand raised and then like forget it, this guy's not worth it sort of thing. So I really appreciate that. But one of the most common objections I get in situations like this, again, is the idea of preparing for the real world. And if this is something that ever concerns you as an unschooling parent or a potentially unschooling parent or whatever, I would love to offer some examples of things we've seen that demonstrate to me that freedom does actually prepare kids for the real world. Because I think it actually is a poignant question, right? I think every parent and every person who works with children should be able to answer the question, well, someday your kid is going to grow up and you're not going to be there to tell them what to do, right? Like they're going to wake up and they're going to say, okay, it's 8 a.m. Do I want to sleep in or not? Do I want to go to work or not? Do I want to go to school or wherever I want to go or not? And if you can't answer, here's how what I'm doing is going to prepare them for that moment, I think it's time to think about that for a little while. And so this hits home with me, right? Because I don't want to have kids come to camp and have it just be Club Med, where then they go and that does set them up for an unrealistic sense of what the world is like or whatever. But really interestingly, when kids came to camp and we gave them this space, we saw some really incredible both avoidance of bad things and embracing of good things. One situation that comes to mind in particular was we had these two kids come to camp. And again, these were two kids whose parents warned me about them, but for different reasons. One kid had some developmental issues. He had Asperger's and a very difficult time reading cues from his peers. And in fact, she had actually told me they'd moved to a new area and they had been there for 7 months. He invited his whole class to his birthday party and no one came. Right? So that's sad. That's like heartbreaking, hearts in a million pieces sort of situation. And so he comes to camp and I want this kid to succeed, right? And then there's this other kid coming to camp. And now he's been in camp in the past, but he had been sent home before I was the director. We never sent the kid home for behavioral reasons when I was there, so I like to brag about that. But he had come to camp and been sent home because he has violent outbursts when he gets annoyed, right? So these kids come to camp, and naturally they're in the same cabin, and they're like oil and water. Right away they're arguing and kind of getting to the point where we're very concerned that it's going to escalate to something physical. And so I come and I decide that I'm going to mediate this discussion between the kids because I'm very concerned, again, about the physical escalation. And I just sat down and heard their issues, and they both had very reasonable concerns and complaints about the behavior and the interactions from the other. And I just turned to them and said, okay, well, just so you guys know, you don't have to stay at camp, and you don't have to stay in this cabin. If this guy's bothering you, I want you to let you know that you can always go up and just join a different cabin. And they said, huh? But like in school, you can't just leave your class and get a new class if someone bothers you. I said, right, this isn't school. This is camp. And what we want to do is make sure you feel safe, especially. You guys are talking about not feeling safe. If that's the case, let's get 20 out of there. And they both looked at each other and looked at me and said, well, we like everyone else in the cabin. And I said, oh, okay. Well, if you like everyone else in the cabin, what do you think we should do? Because obviously, I'm sure you can acknowledge that it's not fair to force the other one out, given that you're both kind of have an equal number of concerns. And then they thought, and the one kid, who's supposed to not understand any social cues, said, well, it sounds like we should figure out a way to make this work. I said, oh, if that's what you think, well, I don't know. Don't let me stand in your way, right? And so they started talking, and they worked out a little plan, and they came to a small micro consensus between them, and for the rest of the week, they worked at trying to be together. It wasn't perfect. Again, it was messy. They yelled at each other from time to time. It was awkward because they weren't experts. I don't think they had really ever been given the space to mediate their own conflicts, so they were not practiced at this yet. But they made it, right? They made it through the week. They came out on the other side, and that kid, Josh, made friends. His camp friends came to his birthday party the next year. Josh actually still comes to our new camp now. And it was really interesting for me, though, because this idea of preparing for the real world someday, I think is one of the ones, it's the biggest straw man we bounce into as unschooling parents sometimes, right? It's the idea that, that the future world, so a common thing is, well, they're going to come to camp and they're not going to have to spend time with people they don't like. Well, what about when they work a job someday where there's someone they don't like? Or you're not going to force them to do anything? Well, what about when they have a job someday again and their boss forces them to do something? And I want to stop them and just say, hold on a second. Because I think we have different visions of what the real world should look like. In the real world, there's no such thing as actually being forced to do something. Now, if you're going to go homeless or something, if you don't continue at the same job, I'm not talking to you. That's a really hard situation and a tough one to be in. But for most people, you actually do have the choice, right? You can make an economic decision. I don't like this person at work, but I could leave if I wanted to. But no, I value the money I'm making enough that I'm going to stick with it. Or, I really don't like my boss, or I really don't like, some aspect of this relationship I'm in, but I'm going to acknowledge that I'm owning the choice here and moving on. And I think, unfortunately, so many adults have this illusion of being trapped in the life they're in because of exactly how they were treated as children, right? Because when you're a child, you are essentially physically trapped in many cases to being where you don't want to be, to being with whom you don't want to be. And when you get in the habit of that, it's no surprise then as an adult, you'll accept that in your life, right? Because someone told you that they were preparing you for the real world, right? So here you are, I've arrived. Now everyone can mistreat me and call me names. And I think it's really interesting, especially as you look into, again, research on, the sorts of things that are correlated with positive outcomes in life. And one of the ones I like to talk to, especially when parents warn me that their kids are going to talk back, this is the thing, I said, well, did you know that talking back is great? Talking back is advocating for yourself. It's when you're feeling wrong, you're willing to pipe up and say, hold on a second, I don't like that idea. And now sometimes I would prefer, when I have a great idea, that people don't interrupt me and say mean things to me about it. But I understand where they're coming from, and I'm always happy to clarify. And so, yeah, for me, I don't want to prepare kids for a life of drudgery where they're doing things they hate. I just as soon get them so used to, first of all, making their own choices and dealing with the outcomes of their own choices and just loving the world that they're in, so that when they're 18, 19, 20, and older, that they're so used to that they won't settle for anything less. Because what I've observed in my life is people that are really dedicated to finding happiness, doing unusual things, and traveling the world, or just doing whatever you want to do. People that are dedicated to that, do it. And people that make excuses for why they can't do it, just don't. And so that's the world I'm preparing people for. But I don't want to go too far without talking about good stuff too. I sometimes get in the habit of pointing out all the bad stuff we can avoid by giving kids freedom, and sometimes forget to talk about the really sweet and amazing things we see. So this is one of the most powerful things I've ever observed that was actually really unanticipated for me, again, coming from a traditional background. So this is my very first summer working at Banner Camp, that old camp I used to work at. And again, I had 3 kids come to camp, the top 3, not the counselor photobombing in the bottom. I always try to cut her out, but there's no way to do it without just making the picture weird. So these kids come to camp, and I get warnings from their parents for a different reason. Their parents each call me up, and they're concerned that their kids are going to feel left out and be picked on in camp. Teddy in particular, and I've asked him because I've shared this story a number of times, his mom was very concerned because Teddy's been picked on his whole life. And the time this picture is taken, he's 15 years old. He's an identical twin that was born months premature, and he's born with cerebral palsy and a speech impediment and Tourette's as well. And so for Teddy, it's very difficult to meet new people and make new friends in the conventional paradigm. And so Teddy comes to camp, and I've heard this story, and I've heard that he's essentially never makes friends, and that he's normally picked on. And mom is just hoping, again, to not get to get a call as soon as anything is going wrong. Teddy's very fragile. He's been picked on every year he's come to camp in the past. And again, I'm thinking, why are you still sending your kid to this camp? We should have lost your trust by now. But again, this is my first summer, so Teddy's there at camp, and on Tuesday I get a call from mom, and mom says, hey, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know you get a lot of calls, but I'm just assuming no news is good news. And now I'm thinking, oh, crap, I was not following Teddy around, just making sure he was going to be okay. I've been so busy. And so my stomach sinks a little bit. And I say, actually, if you'll hold on for a second, they're right outside getting ready for the next activity, and I'll go check. And so I go outside again on Tuesday. The kids come on Sunday, so 2 days later. And this is the scene I walk up on. And it's Teddy and these 2 younger girls. So Kendra in the middle, she's 10 at the time, and Michaela's 14. And they're just playing this really ridiculous game that they had invented together where they're making these absurd faces and trying not to laugh. So they're sticking their tongue out and trying not to laugh. And I said, hey, do you mind if I take a picture? Teddy, your mom called. I just want to send it to her. And he said, yeah, of course. So they make their silly faces. I take the picture, and I get on, and I say, hey, I just talked to Teddy. He's got 2 friends he was playing with outside, and it's going great. And the mom just starts sobbing on the phone. She says, Teddy's never made a friend at camp before. And you said he has 2 friends he's playing with outside? And I'm like, yeah, he's got 2 friends he's playing with outside. And so mom can't talk, right? And she's calling, Steve, Teddy has these 2 friends, right? And so I send him the picture, I email it over, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself, obviously. Mostly because, and unfairly I should say, because this wasn't actually an intended consequence of camp. When we said kids could hang out with whoever they want, we didn't anticipate. I don't think that a 16-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl and a 14-year-old girl would all become best friends. But for them, they had been essentially outcasts in most of the places they had been during their life. The other 2 younger women had been dealing with different developmental issues, or at least their parents and other authorities had told them. And so they came to camp, and they got each other. And actually, while Teddy's story was particularly powerful for me, it was a call I got months and months later that it's something that I'll never forget, and probably the reason I'm still doing camp-related work, even though I find it to be really frustrating. And that was Michaela. She called up, and she said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know something. And I was hoping you could pass along a message for me." And I said, "Well, what's the message, And she said, "That guy that was at camp, Teddy?" I said, "Oh, yeah, Teddy. I remember Teddy, of course." She said, "This is going to sound weird, but could you tell Teddy that he saved my life last summer?" And I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I was going through all this depression, and I told myself that by the time the school year was going to come around," and she's choked up, and I get choked up talking about this too, but when the time the school year was going to come around, I was going to kill myself. And Teddy, and knowing that he had been through, knowing that he had been through all the stuff that I had been through, and that he had made it, gave me so much strength, knowing that I could do that someday too. And Teddy was he's like my hero. He's the coolest guy I've ever met. And I'm thinking, man, Teddy, the coolest guy you've ever met, the guy who can't make any friends, supposedly, according to his mom, comes to camp and he's your hero? Teddy was never meant to lead other 16-year-old boys, into battle or whatever on the football field. Teddy's calling was to be a hero to Michaela and for people like her, right? Because for Michaela, she comes to camp and she doesn't need to see, the all-star sort of bubbly cheerleader type who's going to, get her tied in at the swimming in the waterfront. She needs someone who gets her and gets her pain and what she's been through. And by making space for them all to come together, again, I can't take any credit for it. It was just a function of what we did. We had this tremendous outcome we never could have anticipated. And so, I called Teddy up and I'm telling him, and I asked Teddy if he would come and work for me the next summer because he was going to be old enough to go through our counselors and training program. And I just simply told him, and it's true to this day, that I never had seen anyone achieve a result like that with someone who's in so tough a situation as Michaela. And so Teddy came and he worked for me and was a counselor at camp, even though Teddy's pretty unusual. And when you meet Teddy, he's not, he'll talk to you about all sorts of different things that he would love to talk about, but you might not think I would love to go for 10 more meals with Teddy, or about Star Wars or whatever, but Teddy replicated that result half a dozen times in just 4 years, where these people would come to camp and he has this frequency thing where he just has a frequency for people who are struggling and going through the same things he has, and all he does is sit and listen, because he likes to talk to people. He likes when people want to talk to him. And this idea of mixing ages, of getting people together and just totally letting them loose, this is only one example, but so many incredible examples of kids just fully embracing it. And when I think about what's at stake when we're talking about freedom, when we're talking about letting kids do what they want, because sometimes it seems, I think to other people, like a little bit, I don't know, like a little bit extravagant, or, like we're just trying to, just do all these crazy, kooky things, again, play with slime and do all this stuff. But I think there's a body count with, not giving kids autonomy. There's real losses, there are real things people struggle with and deal with that they wouldn't have to if they could choose where to move their body and who to talk to. And that's why I think, again, for me, this is more than just, playing games and having fun. This is like life or death. So at least it was in this case. And they're all doing great, by the way. Teddy and Michaela are still best friends. I'm Facebook friends with them. They're hanging out and talking and reconnecting when Teddy's home from college and all this stuff. And it's been a pretty cool thing. And so, go into some more stuff. I don't have good transitions for really emotional stories. I'm not a pro at this. I'm doing my best. So, one of the things that we saw in spades, and again, I'm sure most of you see this if you're doing any sort of unschooling thing. This is an Alfie Kohn quote, by the way, is that kids do get better at making decisions by making decisions and not by following directions. One of the things I think that is a big trap I fall into as an unschooling parent in particular. I'm so much more patient with other people's kids, by the way. I'm willing to give your kids all the time they need to develop into the people to be someday. When it comes to my kids, I would love for them to clean up their plates when they're 2, that's my instinct. But what we find is that kids mostly come to camp, and they're given freedoms they've never been given before. And for the most part, they mess up at first. This is also a hole people like to poke. They're like, so kids, they'll just come to your camp and stay up all night and be exhausted the next day. I'm like, sometimes. And they're like, but you're supposed to acknowledge that's really bad. Because for them, they've developed this sense of a binary. If someone makes the wrong decision, well, then you made the wrong choice. And I think that it's really tempting, I think, as a parent, especially the higher the stakes go, the more you want your kid to get it right the first time, I think. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. around certain big picture issues like, maybe like drug use or, whatever your thing is that you're most scared of. But what we found actually was that the younger that you give kids the opportunity to make mistakes, the better, because they'll come to camp and, again, they'll stay up too late. But, show of hands, who here has stayed up too late and been tired the next day? Anyone? A few people? Good. You got to see if some people, I'm not the only one, right? I've stayed up too late and been tired the next day. For the most part, it's worked out fine. Sometimes it's worked out to my great detriment. Like I've stayed up too late, and like when I was student teaching, for instance, they were sure it was going to be a snow day, and I stayed up way too late and did things to my body that made it more difficult to wake up the next day. And then, sure enough, it didn't quite come in the amounts that we were hoping for. And I had some pretty tremendously bad outcomes as a result of that. But I learned from it, right? So like here I am today, and I don't drink anymore. So that's I've come all right on the other side. But what we find is that kids, they'll make these silly mistakes, and then for them it also still feels like the biggest deal in the world. Like, for instance, we don't have any rules about dress, obviously, or footwear. This drives camp directors crazy. I've talked about this here before, but the idea is that kids would be barefoot. They're so scared that people will hurt their feet. And again, sometimes kids hurt their feet, and they get cuts on them, or, we've never had anyone break a toe, thankfully, but and then they kind of limp around for the week, and they're so annoyed, right? They're like, I wish I had worn shoes. Because the world is pretty great about calling out our actually bad decisions. They'll say, hey, you walk around barefoot, eventually you'll get a cut, and then you'll decide if it's worth it or not. Parents, I think, are so quick to want to intervene and try to cut out the middleman, mostly, again, from a good place. We don't want our kids to experience pain that we know is avoidable. But for a lot of people, a lot of the things that we think are mistakes turns out actually aren't even mistakes, right? Like my parents were really concerned growing up because I played a lot of video games. And I was like a first-generation video game addict or something, or whatever you want to call it. Basically, we had computers in our house from a very young age because my dad was a programmer. And so video games are sweet, and I played them all the time. And they were so terrified that I was going to throw my life away on these video games and never make anything of myself that they put these hard restrictions on, and we had tons of fights. And the only outcome was never that I actually stopped playing video games. It was mostly that I started lying to them and, didn't trust them anymore, and they didn't trust me, and all these pretty bad things. And then, of course, I got to college and continued to play video games for like a month because all of a sudden there were all these sweet people around and I could do whatever I want. I didn't need to play video games anymore. So I just stopped, I played 6 or 8 hours a day for many years, and then I just never did again. And it was because there were actual incentives in my life that warranted a change in behavior. And so all that struggles with my parents, all that accomplished was to strain our relationship and to decrease trust and to get me in the habit of being dishonest with them, which I hadn't really been until then. And so what was really gained? Well, at least I knew that they thought video games was a poor way to spend my time. Great. That's a lot of investment for a very small outcome that didn't make me a better person, I don't think. So what are the other things we see at camp? One of the things we see at camp that I think is really interesting, and again, something not that I pictured right away, is a very rapid deschooling process. I just want to check my time. So, deschooling, if that's not a term you're familiar with, it's just the idea that sometimes when you've been schooled or coming from a very conventional background, it takes quite a while sometimes to get your sea legs under you and start using this new freedom wisely. Or from the parent's perspective, to accept that your kid is spending their time however they want. And so, again, one of the concerns to the old, won't kids just come to camp and play video games the whole time concern? What we find is, first of all, some do, and that's fine. It's very, very uncommon, though, because when they're given freedom in 2 ways. So first of all, our camp now is a pretty even mix of kids from traditional schooling backgrounds and either like free schools or unschools or Sudbury schools or somewhere on that spectrum. And what we find is a really, really interesting thing, which is to say, like Lily, I won't embarrass her, she's at the conference now, but so Lily has a very unusual schedule compared to most kids her age during the year, where she's staying up in some cases all the way through the night. She gets to camp, and there's other kids there who are not on that schedule. And she loves hanging out with kids, so she just changed it, She's like, oh, okay, you guys are going to bed at midnight? So will I. We'll wake up at 7 and do it again the next day. Or sometimes they stay up the whole night. But they very, very rapidly start to attune themselves to the community around them when they have a community around them. And so it's why when I talk to other unschooling families, I do try to encourage people to seek out community, And I would never force a kid to be in community with others, but what I find is that being around others is a really good way to get cues from people and start to really be critical about what you actually think is valuable. And when kids are actually given good choices, like I think many people see their kids come home from school and they're like, well, they just play video games all night. And you're like, because what was their other options? Their other options was like hang out with you for a super long time at dinner. That stinks. That's so boring. Some kids like to hang out and just talk to their parents, but it's really unusual that a kid would want to do that all night. Or Peter Gray, I think, talks about the idea that it's very uncommon for kids to want to just go and appreciate the beauty of the outdoors. That's totally reasonable. Like, some kids don't want to do all the same things their parents do, so when they're home, they're doing things that to the parents looks unvaluable, when meanwhile the kid is simply communicating. It's just that the other things going on here aren't interesting to me. And so I think, again, I would counsel parents against feeling this huge amount of pressure to, entertain your kids or to do things for them that, will pull them out of hobbies that you find to be less valuable or whatever. But we do find that by creating a really nutrient-rich environment, and especially where we add, in our mind, the most beneficial ingredient, which is just other human beings. Humans are social, that people are very, very quick to de-school themselves and say, like, okay, I'm going to leave that paradigm behind and now really start thinking critically about what's important to me. The next one, and I talked about this quite a bit in the conversation we had the other day about boundaries, but we've seen a lot of really amazing things come from simply creating an environment where boundaries are defined in a logical and coherent way and all developed in such a way that kids can relate to and opt into. So when I talk about talking in a way that they'll actually hear us, what I mean is throwing out any rules that are put in place designed for adult convenience. And I think, and again, pardon the overlap if you were in the boundaries discussion, but it's very interesting to me to look critically at how I interact with kids sometimes and the things that I'll allow myself, or the leniency I'll take in the way I treat kids versus ways I treat adults. So we started making a list of these with my counselors, and some really, in hindsight, kind of hysterical examples came up if you picture talking to an adult this way. So some of the classics were like an inside voice, So my friend Doug is here. Hi, Doug. Thanks for showing up. If Doug came up to me, Doug and I run our business together, he said, hey, man, great news. This big development happened, and we're going to make it big or something. And I said, hey, man, if you could use an inside voice, that'd be sweet. And he's like, no, but this is really important. Or he would laugh at first, be like, shut up. And then he'd call me a mean name. And I'd say, no, seriously, you need to use an inside voice. We're in a hotel, and there could be people sleeping somewhere in here. And Doug, he would be freaked out, right? He would tell everyone he knew that I, at some point, had flipped out, or soon I was under the influence of something, right? You would never expect an adult to talk to you that way. And yet we excuse ourselves talking to kids that way all the time. Countdown's another classic example of this, where, if my wife were running late to go out, never happened in real life, by the way. We're never late anywhere, but hypothetically speaking, let's say I was married to someone who's occasionally late. And I said, hey, we got to go. And she's like, yeah, 2 minutes. I'm like, you have 10 seconds. 10, 9. Yeah, it wouldn't go well, right? Because no adult would ever stand to be treated that way. The heartbreaking thing with kids is they're so used to being mistreated in these ways that they'll just allow it. They're like, I get it, adults. And this is why kids are so skeptical of adults. Like, even whenever I meet a kid and I'm like, hey, man, welcome to camp. And they're like, skeptical. I'm like, oh, right, you probably hate grown-ups because most grown-ups are really boring and mean to you all the time. We'll have to take some time and develop that. But so yeah, in camp, and I think at home too, I've noticed even as intentional as I try to be about this, these things still creep into my interactions with people. I'm, of all the people in the world, I'm least patient, least understanding with my own kids sometimes. Again, I feel like I can be really patient with your kids when they come to camp. Really a struggle for me sometimes when it's the everyday stuff, and especially if it's the same thing for the 100th time. And then I just need to realize, like, it sounds cheesy, but like a sort of golden rule mentality where if I wouldn't accept other adults in my life treating me this way, I should probably have no good reason to treat my other kids this way. And when we develop rules that are designed just for keeping everyone physically safe and emotionally safe, we've had really tremendous outcomes with that. And again, people not walking all over us. And again, to vacillate between the idea of avoiding bad things and finding good things, we found that another really fascinating thing that I guess we didn't picture at first was this idea of living life to the fullest being a habit. So what I mean by that is you meet a teenager, right? I don't know if you've ever had this experience. And you say, hey, it's so good to meet you. And you're getting to talk, and you're like, so what are you into, And they're like, nothing. So either A, really sad that you haven't come up with any interest, or B, hopefully, you're just, again, skeptical of me, and you're concerned that if you share your interest with me, that I won't approve of them, right? So oftentimes when a teacher says, well, nothing, I'm not interested in anything, what they're communicating is, I'm interested in video games, spare me the speech on video games, we just won't talk about it. I'll just say nothing, and we can move on here. And move on past our awkward conversation. I'll go hang out with the teenagers, you would be with the grown-ups, and we'll move on. But what we did find was that a lot of times kids that come to camp, they actually aren't in the habit of living life to the fullest. When they're given freedom, normally their default mode when given freedom is to decompress. They're like, whew, this is a relief. It's Saturday from the hours of 1 to 5, and now I don't have anything planned for me, so I can just chill, right? And so they watch, like in my days, Saved by the Bell reruns. I would just get home from school and just watch reruns of shows I had already seen because I just needed to turn my brain off. And so when you're given freedom for the first time, I think it's really natural to sort of go into that decompression mode. But when we get kids at camp, and this is the amazing thing, why I'm so grateful that unschooled families in particular are willing to trust us with their kids for a week, is we get to kids at camp that are really used to living life to the fullest, and then they just wind up pulling other people in and giving them a taste. And once people have a taste, then they just can't help it. I remember, again, this is another picture from the first summer at camp. And we had experimented with this idea of letting kids come up with activities on their own. And so again, many kids that have really sadly small dreams, especially kids that have been told what to do for a long portion of their life. So we would give them these pieces of paper on the first day of the week and say, write down your dreams for the week. 3 dreams, basic dream, like playing soccer, a little bit of a more ambitious dream, and like your wildest fantasy, something that if we can make happen, with infinite resources, what it would be. And so by and large, their dreams were like pretty uninteresting, and we were like, man, this is sad, what are we going to do? But there was this one kid, Sean, and Sean is a really unusual kid. He comes from a very, very authoritarian household, but for him, he just won't be squashed, right? Again, another kid whose parents warned me and is on medications for ADD and all this stuff, but he's going to be him no matter what. Doesn't matter how much you medicate him or tell him what to do. Again, Sean and I are still Facebook friends, and he mostly posts videos of Lego figures, stop action fighting each other. So again, he's like 18 or 19 now, but that's just his thing. Sean is really unusual. But Sean comes to me, at the time he's 11 or 12, and says, I have an activity idea. We're going to go to the other side of the lake to see if there's velociraptors over there. I said, okay. Yeah, you can go pitch other people on that. Now, logistically, of course, we only have so many counselors, so I don't think I can send one counselor just off with you for the whole day or anything, but if you can scrape up a few people to go over there, it sounds good, And I'm thinking in my head, like, poor kid, like, everyone's going to really make fun of this person for wanting to find velociraptors. And so this is like at 10 a.m., and he rolls into lunch into my office with 12 other kids, and he's like, we're here. I was like, for what? He's like, we're going to go find velociraptors. We need some counselors. 12 kids. Oh boy, okay. So we go, and we get their like gear together, and they're going to go, and they're going to like eat. And I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be a hike, and they'll play make-believe, whatever. And so we get to the boats, and we're out there, and they're getting ready to set sail. And there were these other kids, these 2 older kids, and they were looking on, and they kind of had smirks on their faces, And so I went over, and I'm thinking, oh man, this stinks. They're being judged right now. And I get over, and the kids say, this one kid, Aiden's like, there's no velociraptors over there. Yeah, I know. They're having fun. And I'm still feeling a little self-conscious on Sean's behalf. He said, but it'd be crazy. What if we went over there and we pretended to be the native people that have been living on this land forever and no one's ever found us? And I thought, that would be kind of cool, We could do that. And so again, Aiden runs up, and he rustles up like 15 or 20 kids, and then they run full speed all the way to the other side of the lake. Turns out it's faster just to walk across the lake and take a boat. So they get over there, and of course I ran over there with them. And so Sean and his buddies come in, and they're playing make-believe, and they're like, yes, we'll go on our expedition, and we'll hope to find velociraptors. And they pull into this little bay, and all of a sudden these other kids, all of a sudden it's just spears out of the bushes, right? What? And then all these kids emerge out, and they're covered in mud. What are you doing over here, And so it's this incredible, like, make-believe extravaganza. No adult had any role in the planning or the implementation other than, playing and being fun about it. But none of the planning was involved on us. And they had this explosive time. People are wrestling in the water. It's still legendary. People still talk about it and post random pictures of it, and it's a really, really cool thing. But the interesting thing we saw, this is like the 3rd or 4th week at camp, was we had spent 3 weeks, trying to get kids' engines turning on this kind of stuff. And this one kid, Sean, lit this one match under this one small group of kids. And for the rest of the week, there was like this crazy, insane, aliens were visiting the forest, and they were building colonies out there. And then there were like nights. And for the whole week, just this one kid showing other people what it was like to live life to the fullest sparked a whole camp's worth of people. And of course, then all the counselors saw what was possible, and people were telling stories later in the summer. So for the rest of the summer, and indeed for the rest of the time I worked at Banner Camp, stuff like this became commonplace. Like this exact activity sort of thing had been replicated. And it just started with one person. And I thought it was really interesting just to see how the old "it only takes a spark to get a fire going" sort of thing. Living life to the fullest really is that way. And even kids that had been through a lot and were really struggling with life were totally willing. Even the coolest, most cynical teenagers were really willing to just go bananas when it felt socially accepted to. So it's something we've stuck with ever since then. So another big one for us is the idea of trust with technology. And I think it's another thing that some families struggle with when, I know our family sometimes, this is something that comes up, right? The idea that when given technology, is there something inherently addictive or dangerous with technology or whatever? And as far as I know, we were the first conventional sleepaway camp for all ages that allowed kids to bring cell phones and whatever else to camp. Maybe there was another one out there that just doesn't brag about it, but we like to. And so, to be honest, lifelong camp people, we were a little bit concerned that when people would come to camp, that they would just sit around texting the whole time, because this is what people make you afraid of. But what we actually found was that technology was, we found that technology was actually a connector rather than a divider. In fact, kids didn't want to sit around texting. Instead, it made heroes out of, again, there was this kid, Zach, who was autistic, who would walk around and play Pokemon all day on his thing. And so Zach would walk around and play Pokemon, and he seemed to be fine and engaged, and we were working about it. And then one day, he's walking around, and he stops for a second, and he's looking at his thing, and someone's like, "Hey, Zach, is everything all right?" He's like, "I'm going to battle a legendary Pokemon," right? And so some other kid's like, "What did you say? You're going to battle a legendary Pokemon?" They're like, "He's going to battle a legendary Pokemon?" And these 5 kids run over, and so Zach is battling this thing, and he captures the Pokemon, and the whole crowd erupts in joy, and Zach all of a sudden again, this unlikely protagonist of the Pokemon story at camp, was this hero to these little kids. And so Zach and his little crew of ducklings would just sit and play Pokemon whenever we had free time. And yeah, you're sharing. And so Zach, again, someone who comes to camp has difficulty making connections, generally speaking, or doesn't really seek them out, was able to leverage this technology, this shared language that he had with these kids, into real connections. I mean, I don't know that they kept up in touch forever, but I could tell the sense of confidence that Zach had around this game, and could tell the connections that he was having. And I think that brings me to sort of the final thing I wanted to talk about. And again, I know this is something that you all are probably quite skilled at, but it's been one of the more powerful observations that we've had at camp, which is just the idea of letting kids define success for themselves. I think that it's very tempting as a grown-up to have a pretty narrow view of what success looks like. And I think in a lot of ways, probably many of us have moved past the idea that success equals college and grad school and becoming a doctor someday. But I think there are other ways that, that we were raised and we were socialized to view as successful. I think one of the more common ones is social success, right? I think many of us inherently, and I'm talking about myself, so maybe you don't share this view, but inherently I see someone who is very socially successful or has a lot of friends or is very easy in new social situations, and I think, well, that person's got it all figured out. They're doing really well for themselves. And I see someone who's shy or has difficulty engaging with new people, and my instinct is oh, well, that person doesn't have it as figured out as that person does. Because I was raised to believe that being a social butterfly was much more valuable than not, or that being able to go out there in new situations and meet new people and talk to new people and get up in front of people and talk is somehow valuable, and that being an introvert is not. And I think there's countless examples of this, but one of the universal truths I found with children in general is that when we can take out our own baggage, and for me, being social was really hard growing up. I was not super cool, I really had trouble meeting new people and putting myself out there, and especially talking in public and stuff. And for me, I remember that pain and what that feels like, and I mostly want to help kids avoid that pain. But I think a much better way of helping them avoid that pain is not by forcing them into social situations until they get good at it, which is what I had to do. It's instead to just let them choose when they want to be social and when not to. And it's kind of funny when you start reshifting your mind in that way, because, again, kids are going to place a value for themselves on what feels cool or what is interesting or what feels important to them. And so much of the unconscious value baggage that we put on them by saying oh, it's better. Don't you want to get out and meet new friends? Don't you want to go see your friends? Why do you want to sit around and play video games all day when we could go hang out with your friends? It's man, my dad really wants me to have lots of friends. That's the main thing I'm hearing right now. It's not that he cares about me or wants better things for me. It's that maybe he'll value me more if I have more friends or if I'm getting out there more. And so that's something we're working on a lot. But again, we see it's actually interesting when you get huge groups of people together. huge groups of kids and I'm in charge of them, it's very easy for me to take a step back and say, well, there's no way I could force every kid here to have a perfect time. And then they just have a better time than if I actually was trying to help them have a good time. It reminds me of a really powerful observation from John Holt, actually. And I think this is from Instead of Education, where he talks about babies. And that's why Laura, our lovely camp director who drew this slide for me, make this slide this way. And she talks about how babies, or he talks rather, about how babies, when they come into the world, they have these super, super important lessons to learn. Mandatory stuff for succeeding in life, right? Walking and talking. And incidentally, evolution has it as such where babies also can't understand grown-ups, like at all, you know. In fact, they don't receive any input from grown-ups other than like, is this person nice or mean? They won't take any information. They don't want any input on any of the things they do because the stuff they're doing is so important that they don't want grown-ups to screw it up, right? Like you can picture the cave babies from back in the day who actually could understand. And the grown-up's like, now you stand up and now put the foot here. And the baby's like, I'm working on it. Like, and they're like, no, you can't figure this out. Or like with talking, now put your tongue right up against the back of your mouth and you're going to shoot it forward. And that's how you make an S, right? But you can picture that being like a complete disaster. So we've evolved to completely ignore grown-ups until we've really got the basics taken care of. And then grown-ups can start meddling and screwing everything up. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take from him. And maybe I'm just reading more into that than he intended, but that's how I felt. And then my final slide is just another cute baby drawing, because that's it. I don't know. She made too many drawings, so yeah, that's fine. So I would love to, if you all have questions or objections or curiosities about kind of what goes on at camp or how things wind up working, I'm happy to talk and go into more of that. But if you just want to talk kids and stuff, we can do that too. But yeah, open the floor to you if you're interested. Doug says he's got a phone call. Yeah, great question. It's from 6 to 17.
6?
Yep, and that's all mixed age. So kids come to camp and we don't have any age-restricted activities. Sometimes kids choose to play soccer only with their teenage friends or whatever, but generally they do whatever. Yeah, Lee.
So it's very similar to the democratic school concept.
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar in principle. There are some fairly fundamental differences. I mean, one of the things that's interesting, and I don't know which is better or worse, we only have them for a week, right? So like there's some things that we sort of can't take as much time on as democratic schools are, so that's a limitation for us. On the same token, we have some benefits, like democratic schools do have attendance requirements, for instance, like especially if you're trying to meet state standards on attendance. We also don't set community expectations by consensus in the same way democratic schools do, so I think that's a really nice thing about many democratic schools, but I think there are examples. I've worked with some Sudbury schools, so I've heard some examples where things sort of can get off the rails when it's the majority is deciding things. Sometimes the majority can make weird rules, like there was a girl I knew who went to a Sudbury school that I guess will remain nameless, but they had these like really strict penalties about walking on the wrong side of the road because someone had made a really good pitch at the school meeting that it was super dangerous to walk on the left side of the road versus the right. So it was for everyone's best interest, but you could get in like some pretty serious limitations on your freedom placed on walking on the wrong side of the road. So we go with benevolent dictatorship, which is basically you just can't hurt people at camp, and or take their stuff or break the law, because that could get us in trouble and you in trouble. And we don't let kids have sex with each other either, because that's very unpopular with many parents and legal organizations. Yes.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah. Meals. What do you do with meals?
Great question.
The sort of schedule and what's meals.
Yeah, so there are some logistic limitations to what we do sometimes. Generally speaking, we have, in the same way you would say you were on a cruise, there are meal times when the cafe is open or whatever. Generally speaking, pretty much everyone goes and eats at the same time, just because that's where everyone goes. But if you don't want to eat a meal, that's not a big deal. If you're consistently not eating, we'll just be in communication with the parents. Some kids have very different eating habits from one another. And again, a lot of camps it's like a given at most camps that they'll force you to eat or at least try whatever they're serving. But yeah, we serve a very varied menu, cooked fresh for the most part, and then leave snacks available all day. So some kids just graze and eat apples or whatever. But for the most part, people just come and eat at the time some meals are served. Yeah.
It sounded like we're on water. There had to be accounts we went across the
yeah.
water. Right. Are there any other activities that require that level of literacy?
Yeah. I mean, so camps again have a different legal burden than many places. So, for instance, like we have to have at least a set of eyes on a kid if they're going to be, unless they're going to go to the bathroom or something. So we can't let kids just like walk all over the place without us keeping an eye on them. It's just a legal limitation on camps.
Just in the order, like, nothing to do with water. It's like they're going to cabin to the
Yeah, I mean, there's even more regulations on the water, but yeah, even just, I mean, going from, we set things up in such a way to give kids like as much freedom as we can. So like we have a huge field, so kids can be walking or be 100 yards away and just having private conversations or whatever. But yeah, we need to be aware of their whereabouts in a level that even and many schools don't need to. It's kind of weird, but it's what we got to do. Yeah.
Has any other camp been able to replicate?
Most camps are not interested in replicating what we're doing, but
So you haven't been able to sell the idea.
well, no, I mean, incrementally we have. So like, again, I've done the bulk of my public speaking to other camps. Most camps are more interested in the fun activities that we've come up with than the interesting things we're doing with kids. But yeah, there are camps that have adopted, like especially unstructured play areas, and people that have experimented with like schedules by consensus. Many camps have thrown away. Because like many camps are formed like, hey, the group of 12 kids goes from activity to activity to activity. And like it's just for them, it's mind-blowing to even give kids choice at all of what they do. So we've seen and heard about a lot of people that have moved more to a choice-based model. But yeah, no, I mean, there's like not back to school camp, right? So they work with only teenagers, and in many ways they are able to, since it's only teenagers, afford more freedoms than we can in some ways. But no conventional sleepaway camp is doing exactly what we are at this point. Yeah, is there another question? Cool. Well, thanks for coming and talking about camp. Hopefully it met your expectations and exceeded them. Happy to talk and connect if anyone wants to hang out more, but thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I know it's a weird time of night to carve out an hour, so thanks.